Hello and a very good evening and a good afternoon at the Privacy Week. It's Saturday, the 31st of October. It's Halloween. So hello from Vienna. Our guest for this next talk is someone I very much look forward to, is the Lisa Figas. Hi. You deal with privacy agendas, net politics is your issue, and end-to-end encryption. You work at a provider of encryption software, Box Crypto, so it's not just a hobby. It's also something that you really deal with professionally. And you have brought us an overview about bye-bye end-to-end encryption. And I think you said that in your announcement that this is a US issue, but you have heard that other parts of the world are dealing with this too, right? Yes, there is a lot happening, and that's what I would like to talk about. Great. Okay, what shall I say? The stage is yours. Bye-bye. Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to give a short introduction into why we talk about laws that deal with the abolition of end-to-end encryption. That is, for one thing, about what's happening in large countries as the US, if things change there legally, that in the broadest sense deal with digital businesses, then many people all over the world are affected. And in the same way, it's a big issue, not just on the national but international level, that we have to look at, see to the surveillance state not being extended any further. And the whole issue of end-to-end encryption and the whole argument is a very complex social issue that many people in many countries deal with. And that is something I find very interesting. And as I said at the beginning, of course, end-to-end encryption pays my rent as well. So that's why another reason why I am passionate about it. Just briefly to explain what end-to-end encryption actually means. I'm not going to explain it technically. There are other places where you can read up on that, but just to give you a broad context. The special thing about end-to-end encryption is that only the sending and the receiving person can actually read the content of what's being sent. So the company that operates the platform over which the message is exchanged, which could be a messenger service, an email provider perhaps, they have no way of reading out the clear text of the message. And this procedure is used for audio and video communications as well. We have talked a lot about Zoom wanting to implement this so that video calls could be end-to-end encryption, and cloud storage is important. I'm sorry, I seem to have been missing a part of my presentation. I was going to show at which point the message can be seen, which is at the sender, at the receiver, and to show some other places where the message cannot be seen. But I think you don't need beautiful arrows. Oh, sorry, here they are. How that actually is done. Now, those that use end-to-end encryption ensure that only authorized people see the message. And of course, that is important for private communications, but it's also widely used when you consider patents. Health services have an interest in end-to-end encryption. Journalism is another understandable area where this applies, because you have to protect your sources, for example, and political work, when you deal with suppressed people, oppositions, NGOs, and of course, we have legal aspects such as the General Data Protection Regulation. We have the secrecy of telecommunications, which is a legal a basic law, and that makes it necessary to use end-to-end encryption. So in summary, you could say that it is very responsible if you are a user, if you use end-to-end encryption. I'm first going to talk about the so-called Earn It Act in the US. That is a law that members of both parties brought into Congress, and if the control room could switch to the slides, I've given I've given you the list of names of people that brought it into Congress, and the colors signify the parties, because a new law needs a sponsor, people that with their name put their name behind the proposal. And it's something that is known that they have very poetic abbreviations for their talks, for their laws. And the reasons given for this act included child pornography, which of course is not the issue. That is one that is often used, but the issue that was mentioned is actually called CSAM, which ASM, which is child abuse material. I'm missing the S right now. So the aim is to restrict the use of this, and the issue is that providers are told to prevent the spread of these materials by enabling decryption. And this is a kind of move through the back door. So you have to talk about liabilities as well. Section 130 of the Communications Decency Act, which is from 19... didn't get the year.
Yeah, it's also about social networks. So you know these argumentations from Zuckerberg, for example. And he says, we are just a platform. We have nothing to do with the informations in there. And he's talking about section 230 of the Communications Decency Act from 1996. And of course, the public, the official area people don't like that a lot of things is happening under this section, and it gets used a lot, and they feel it's abused a lot, and there's a lot of discussion how it could be weakened or modified. And one idea is the carve out idea, where some content is not protected by section 230 anymore. They did that with Foster or Sesta, which is about sex work, which I'll come to later again, but also some bargaining systems. For example, that they have protection against liability exemptions that companies can lose. So only if they have meet certain criteria, they have these exemptions. And that's what the Earn It Act is about. And there were several versions of this, which is completely normal. But I think it's okay if we only have the current version, which is up for a vote soon. And what's important here is that we understand the moderator's dilemma. Which only got included in the last step. So the problem for the Earn It Act, or with the Earn It Act, even though it's a bipartisan project, so that means both of the big parties partake in it, it's still, they argue a lot, also in the civil society. And that means that, well, basically, the exemption of liability should only stand if scanning of materials is allowed and is possible. So CSAM material can be scanned out, can be filtered out. And nowadays, in the current version, they also took out the end-to-end encryption again. So usage of end-to-end encryption will not lead to a loss of these exemptions from liability. And that's weird for the companies because it makes the whole situation more complex. Because that would mean that you should probably encrypt everything or nothing. And then you could say you are still exempt from your liability as a company, but that does not really fit with the original goal of the law. So the sponsors of the law promised something to the public, and it doesn't fit to that promise. And additionally, there's a big problem that this whole process, it does not work with the laws that a lot of states in the US already have. So it's unclear how a single company should follow both laws at the same time. A federal law and the state law and all of the versions, how can it follow those if they contradict each other? So now the Judiciary Committee agreed to this version of the law, and now it's up for a vote. It's also a little confusing because CSAM should be exempt from the Earn It Act of Section 230, but a lot of things already are exempt. And not just the upload and download of such material, it's still already classified as a crime, as a federal crime, as a state. Well, US-wide, it's classified as a crime already. So now the companies will have to check on people who upload material a lot more. They have to know who they are. They have to identify them properly to help the the police forces. And that's basically only possible if you collect even more data than you already do as a provider of such a platform. So for the citizens who are using the platforms, who want to use the platforms, they are losing privacy and data protection because having an anonymous account is even more difficult. And the last one is a point that's not just within the Earn It Act, is that companies come into a position where they are basically censoring the web, and so they are deputized and mandated to censor the net, which has constitutional concerns, especially in the US. And right now we are within the process at a point where it was reported on, and next the Senate and the House has to agree on it, and then the President has 10 days time to either sign it or veto it. And now it is known that the US a lot is happening in the US at the moment. So at least to my knowledge, it's not known what's gonna happen. And for the next, but we have to have a look at it. We have to follow it closely. So, me personally, I actually found this law because of resistance, basically. So there is resistance from both parties, basically, but there's also a lot happening in the civic public. And there is basically 3 organizations, and I want to take special note of 3 of those, of 3 NGOs. One is the Electronic Frontier Foundation, one is Fight for Future, and one is the Mozilla Foundation. You can also sign for that. You don't have to be an US American citizen. Well, it doesn't even ask for it. And it might be worth it to have a look at this for those of you who are at the PC anyways. And what might be interesting, there's also been resistance from sex workers, and this is a screenshot from an Instagram. If you put it into the search on the green field, you can see the hashtag that's mostly used, Stop Earn It, so hashtag Stop Earn It. And you might wonder why especially the sex workers are against it and worry about it at all. That's because they have made bad experiences with such changes of the law. Mostly it was about foster. It was also used. Well, I don't really know what it was about right now, sorry. But the result was that the page backpage.com was shut down, where sex workers could offer their services. And I think they could also do online sessions, but it was mostly about the satisfaction between, or the relation between offers and open positions, basically. And without this page, it's a lot more dangerous because in the streets, the work is a lot more dangerous than it is online. So, for example, in San Francisco, the crimes related to pimping and sex trafficking have more than tripled in 2018. And that is mostly related to the shutdown of this page due to foster. And that also lead to death cases. So that is why this group of people and this group of internet users is very careful and very active when it comes to protecting user rights in the internet. And the great question is, if you do this surveillance and filter out CSAM, could you actually protect children using that or doing that? And it's a very complex situation. So first of all, you have to wait. What will actually happen? How will companies sue through the system, basically? And how will the courts interpret the law? And in the US, we have a system of precedence cases. And before there is a precedence case, a company does not really know what the law means. So before that, you don't really know what happens. So right now we are at a point where we will need to wait a few years how the law will actually be used. And the other difficulty is that the focus is on filtering the material, but it's relatively easily understood that that doesn't lead to actually protected children that can be seen on the pictures. So those children are not automatically rescued from their situation just by filtering and deleting the pictures. And I really like this quotation: they are exploiting children to end exploitation of children online. So basically, they are also kind of exploiting the children. They are using them as an excuse to expand surveillance. After the Earn It Act in the US, I also want to talk about other countries because that's not less important by any means. So first, there are the Five Eyes Plus. just 10 days ago, I think this was made public, and this is an international statement from Five Eyes. So UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, USA, plus India and Japan in this specific statement. And that's not a law or a proposition for a law, but it's something that they just tell the public that they consider end-to-end encryption as a risk for the public safety. And they argue that sexual abuse of children is enabled by this, that violent crime happens, but they also reference terror and planning of attacks. And the paper also addresses that technology companies, well, they ask nicely that the companies offer technological solutions, how both the privacy and the public can be protected. And the public, by protecting the public, they mean keep the mentioned crimes from happening. And they say, yeah, encryption is important. But at the same time, they say, well, or they put into question if the public can be kept safe without reducing privacy. Yeah, so this is what the letter looks like. And I was kind of disappointed that it's just a boring text document. I don't know what I expected, some sigils or something. You can download it from the platform in the United Kingdom, for example. But all of these countries offer the statement.
Australia is a special case because they prohibited end-to-end encryption as early as they have already put this into law. The law is called the Assistance and Access Act. I didn't note what year this was passed. I think it was 2018, but there are some initial figures about how much this was used. And I believe that we don't have to go into this in much detail, but there is a three-stage procedure, how you would start with the friendly request or question to a company, could you please? And then there is a certain escalation, and the Australians are not very happy with this law, rather unhappy. Most of all, of course, the IT industry, because this regulation only refers to Australian companies and not services that are offered in Australia by foreign companies. So the users are simply moving off to other services, which is a known problem. If you are going to weaken system security, people will move. Also, the judicial involvement is only does only happen at the last step. And a very strange thing, I believe, is how that manufacturers of parts for electronic equipment also fall under this law. So if you produce cables, for example, you have to enable access to content that is transported via these cables. That's how I understood it. And because the hurdles are very low for the investigating authorities, this law can actually be used all the time. So if the offenders are convicted, there's something like a 3-year sentence. For example, if you were to restrict people making political statements, this could lead to borderline cases. And what was it like in the first 12 months? Officially, the law was used in a low 2-digit number of cases, but some government authorities do not have to report according to the law. So you don't know whether they have used this thousands of times, and there's no way of finding out either. Then we'll take a look at the European Union, where we have Mr. Gilles de Kerchove, the anti-terror coordinator of the European Union. Sorry. He is particularly focused on the Assistance and Access Act from Australia. He praises it very, very highly, and the Earn It Act was mentioned by him in a positive way a number of times. And he wants unregulated encryption to be stopped. Now, the European Union, here we have the situation that there's an e-privacy directive, which will be extended on the 21st of December and will apply to messengers that do not use phone numbers in the broadest sense. So certain messengers, email, webmail, internet telephony. So these services will now newly be covered by the e-privacy directive, which means that stricter privacy controls will apply. Now already, for a few years, in fact, some providers voluntarily scan uploads for child sexual abuse material. WhatsApp is one of them. Microsoft had a large program with the photo DNA software, and online gaming providers, not so large, not as large as Facebook and Microsoft. Now, these people would have to stop such scanning due to the e-privacy directive. And there is a certain confusion here that the people responsible only now notice, as the 21st of December is getting closer, that this is going to happen, which is why in September, if I'm not mistaken, an e-privacy derogation was proposed, so an exemption from e-privacy, which allows these companies to further scan for child sexual abuse material. And these exemptions say that only those companies that scan already can continue to do so, and they have to use what they call a proven technology. So only established technologies. So this exemption is supposed to be valid for 5 years, which would be to end of 2025. So that would mean that private communications on the internet are less protected than the letters that are covered by the classical secrecy of communication, letters sent by post. While the known actors in Europe, of course, they are protesting against this very strongly. I've included some screenshots from Twitter here, Chaos Computer Club, and Pat Breyer is someone whom I'd like to recommend, a member of the European Parliament for the Pirate Party, and he is very active and works against this, a very good source. And I'm referring to him when I say that there's a huge threat in the weakening of the extension of these filters to other issues. What is currently foreseen is that companies that voluntarily scan are allowed to do so, but we know already that this may continue, will become a must continue, which is what Eva Johansson, the European Commissioner that is responsible for this, has said quite clearly. So the threat is that as soon as you move towards this, if you go along this route, you will extend to scanning not just for terrorism, but also other crimes, drug dealing perhaps, or anything that might become a crime or be regarded as a crime as in the future. And Another known argument against such scanning technologies or methods is that the internet becomes less secure for everyone, but because the people that really want something bad, they will always have the option to create safe communications for themselves, which is not so difficult. But everyone else will have less secure communications, which cannot be the intention. So putting citizens under a general suspicion and undermining security through the e-privacy derogation, that cannot be the intention. Now, the European Union, or the European Commission rather, conducted an expert hearing. I'll read out the list of companies: Microsoft, Google, Europol, which is not a company, police authorities, the British Secret Service, GHCQ, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children of the US, and other children's child protection organizations. They were all asked what their opinion was on end-to-end encryption, or how you could deal with the question of filtering without violating privacy. And the result was that 10 various approaches were identified. Some of them were rejected later on, or were said that they needed further research. But the current favorites are methods that use hashes of an image, for example, and for these hashes then to be stored not on the device, but on certain servers where they could be matched, so that after the creation of such a hash, the message could still be end-to-end encrypted. So that's something I've described in a bit more detail in the slides, but I'm not going to go into detail right now. Now, exactly at the time when I thought, oh dear, maybe my talk is going to be a bit dry and boring, who's interested in all these laws, Ashton Kutcher wrote a tweet, because Saskia Esken, one of the heads of the German Social Democratic Party, well, she alerted her or asked her about the issues of privacy and protection of children. You don't know if you've seen this. The whole of Twitter seemed, oh my God, a bit of Hollywood from the Social Democrats. And the resolution was that Ashton Kutcher herself works or has invested in a foundation, or is one of the co-respondents, called Thorn. I've noted the URL if you want it. So Ashton Kutcher is offering such a software. So that was the solution why Saskia Esken was explicitly addressed. We don't know. Of course, she is an influential personality, but you would have thought that someone at the EU level would be addressed, because his company, well, it wasn't named, but reasonably, we know that his company is very much involved in the current lobbyism and lobby campaigns that want to bring that e-privacy derogation forward. Okay. Now, a further look to Germany. There's a lot of talk about the law to fight sexualized violence against children. And this is mainly about, well, it says that the communication, ownership, and the obtaining of child pornography is supposed to be classified as a crime. So the penalties, well, the classification of the offense and thus the penalties should be changed and raised. There's a lot about criminal law here, but again, it does contain steps that are supposed to enable digital searching of devices or make that more easy. The first reading has happened in the German Parliament. It was yesterday, and it now gets to the committee stage, and we'll have to watch how this goes on. That's the proposed law in Germany. I'm conscious of the time. I would like to point to the fact that a lot of applause comes from right-wing populist people and parties, something I would like to quickly add. I know I'm short of time. The issue of documented child abuse material is a global problem. Poverty has a big role to play, and because families often have little other ways of earning money, not too many alternatives to creating these materials, and Corona has actually made this problem worse because poverty has drastically been toughened for some people, and also demand has risen because people are spending more time online and are, I would say, more bored. And what's important in this context is that QAnon is riding this wave as well. They took on this whole Save Our Children issue and made it their own. And they are arguing that children need to be protected, and there are so many crimes against children, and if you are not of that same opinion, then you are a bad person, and because who could be against protecting children? I would just briefly like to say there was this whole Pizzagate thing, the rumor that children's blood was being extracted, the conspiracy mythologies, conspiracy narratives. Is that something you've heard probably? But they are stepping this up and they're moving it to Europe. They're gaining influence, and it is a way of arguing that many people that are not in the issue can easily agree with, and they can fall into that trap. Otherwise, we often are dealing with false information, particularly false statistics. To give just one example, in the US, this figure of 800,000 abused children every year is often quoted, or no, sorry, kidnapped and children that go missing. That figure comes from a very different context. And children that disappear and don't reappear, we have about 115 per year. That is terrible, of course. But I would like to show that the emotional argumentation uses problems that are not the same. I have a few other things about the software that I looked up. I could move that to the Q&A.
And basically, we have, and I think that was in the Bruce Schneier talk already a topic, we have to become active, we have to get into the discussion. I listed a few organizations that also care about this topic of encryption, where you can donate, where you can sign petitions, and where you can just retweet and just help in any way possible. But basically, whenever you are active in this area, that it's very difficult to win against the argument, well, we want to protect the children. So my statement is now, we should really be careful as a society that we are not taking our standards for security, safety, freedom, and everything, and define those standards by the behavior of criminals. And yeah, that's it from me, and thank you very much. I want to give back to the moderation now. Great talk, and of course perfectly in time. I didn't expect Ashton Kutcher, but QAnon? Well, yeah. Pizzagate, of course. Yeah, so it's an old story. The reasons that will come up is always terrorism or child abuse. And of course, those are important problems, but they are always misrepresented. And that's always the problem with fake news. A little kernel of truth is usually in there. And of course, there is terrorism. There is child abuse and documentation of child abuse, and we have to do something about it. So, of course, it's understandable that governments want to address that, but the potential use, and that's a lot heavy air quotes, that is rather small. Yeah. So, do you have an idea how little this helps? Also in this area, there are a lot of sources that contradict each other. I can say that I've talked to people who are on the side of law enforcement, and they say encryption is not our problem. We have other problems. There are stones that are put into our ways, or at finding in these people. But for example, the BKA, the state police, the federal police in Germany, that say the numbers are going back. But I also already explained that it's a global problem. I think the Philippines are known as a country where material is coming from. The numbers are basically non-existent. At least I couldn't find anything. It is actually difficult for us as non-experts to guess or to include these data or these ideas into what we know, but the emotional area is over-dominant. But what's also interesting is that these organizations that are working for the deletion of that material, they are saying that it has to be removed from the internet because the children, once they are escaping that environment or are rescued out of this environment, they need the removal of the material for the healing. And that is something that psychologists who work on these cases in court, they very much doubted that it's actually that important for the therapy. So as many things in life, it's a lot more complex and it's a lot more complicated if you look more closely. But what is definitely wrong is emotional arguments and an emotional approach of lay people, what is mostly what we are dealing with here. So this Save the Children, it's in this, what was it called? A pastel Instagram, a mommy bloggers, and they are fast with saying, yeah, of course we have to protect the children. But sometimes when you're looking at children of crying women who are saying, we have to do something, that's, well, some of this can be just acted, but it's mostly people who have no idea what they're talking about. And that's something that's important for me, because the audience here is probably quite enlightened about that, but it's important to talk about it anyways. Next question. Yeah, I know it's difficult to say what is to come, but we will soon have a small election in the US. Do you think, well, I'm wondering, you will probably not know who is to win, and it's gonna be a nail biter, but will it make a difference? Will it make a difference in the real politics that's happening? So we'll assume one of the two, Trump or Biden, but do you think there will be a relevant influence into this discussion we are having right now? So all in all, I can't say. I'm not as entrenched in these discussions And in these topics, I have a very personal opinion, and I have to say it's a personal theory. So especially this Earn It Act, it's such a complicated affair. It can't go into a proper law. So I have the assumption that it will just quietly die. So after the election, other things will be more important. And then after that, maybe nobody will work on it again, and they will probably try to build something new instead and try to find another lever. But that's just my layperson opinion after dealing with these things a little, because it's really just such a weird law after so many changes that were made. So nobody can really win with this. None of the parties will have any advantage. Was that a question from the audience? We have trouble hearing Jürgen. Okay, he's back. Yeah, thank you very much again. It was very interesting and exciting. And after a few minutes, so in a few minutes, you'll be in our break room. You can find the break room on a button or on a link, privacyweek.at/Pausengespräche, German for break room talks. And thank you very much again.